Hey, I'm Matt. This is the 10-Minute Bible Hour, and I am giddy excited right now because I'm about 2 minutes away from firing up a Skype conversation with Karen Jobes. She is a longtime professor at Wheaton College. She's a biblical scholar. She knows all the languages and how to do all this stuff. And she was a longtime member of the New International Version Translation Committee, which means that for me, I look at this and I read all the books and try to figure out how all that scholarship happened and to piece it together and to make fun videos about it and hopefully fun videos about it. But for her, she lives in that world. It's been her job. So I'm really excited to connect with her and to share this interview with you so that we can maybe pull back the curtain and get inside the world of how the Bible in a modern English translation happens. So I'm very excited to introduce you to her, and I'm going to make this go. How did you go from somebody who was a Christian and hanging out in a church to somebody who's helping to translate the New International Version?
I think it was because I have a PhD in New Testament, but I had done my doctoral dissertation work on the book of Esther, the Greek version of Esther, in comparison to the Hebrew. And the Committee on Bible Translation, which is kind of the official name of the NIV committee, asked me to please review the NIV text of Esther and make any suggested proposed revisions to the text back in the 90s, soon after I had worked on that for my dissertation. And as a result of that, one thing led to another, and they invited me to join the committee. So I was on that committee for about 20 years.
And during that time, you guys did not produce a new translation from scratch. You produced revisions of the New International Version. When did the NIV start?
Yeah, the NIV had been out. The completed original NIV had been out since 1984. And because scholarship moves on and because English language changes a lot over time, the committee was working on a revision of the NIV. So that's the point at which I joined them. Several of the original translators were still on the committee, and I had the privilege of working with them. But it was a revision of an existing text, not a fresh translation.
So you put together this team. How many people are on it? What are the skill sets that they bring to it? Is everybody on it a Christian?
Yeah, well, this Committee on Bible Translation is a self-governing, independent committee of 15 biblical scholars holding PhDs in either Old or New Testament. And then among the committee, we each have various specialties of research. So the committee is made up of people who bring their expertise to the table, and we all work on the entire canon of Scripture. So every scholar reviews the proposed changes, whether it be to the Old or the New Testaments. When we get together annually, usually in the summer, we discuss that. We each contribute our particular perspectives and expertise, and then the committee votes.
From my limited study, I feel like a big percentage of the New Testament is pretty obvious in terms of the translation. It's really about English style as much as anything. But I've also run into places where I could see how there would be controversy about what this or that turn of a phrase means in the original Greek. What happens when you guys can't agree?
Well, then, if we can't get a supermajority of the committee to agree and reach consensus, then the NIV text stays the way it was.
Okay.
It's a very conservative process. We don't change the text very quickly or lightly. But we also spend quite a bit of time trying to convince each other. We all feel pretty passionately about the Bible and about our work, and the proposals to revise it don't come just from the committee. We get them from many, many sources, other colleagues, pastors, just general Bible readers. But we take them all seriously and spend enough time on them to make sure that if it's a revision that should happen, that we can get that into the text legitimately through a supermajority vote.
How do you go from shaking hands and getting to know each other to putting the finishing touches on the thing and popping it in the envelope and sending it out? What's the process like?
Well, the process is that we either solicit or we receive proposed revisions to the text throughout the year. All of those go to each member of the committee, and we research it throughout the year. And then we gather together, and the committee is self-perpetuating. So even though none of the original translators are really working on the text anymore, though many of us knew them. And by spending that much time together every summer, we do develop good collegiality and friendships. Once we continue to collect these, the revision of a Bible translation takes a long time, like a decade or more. And so we just continue to do the work year by year on various books of the Bible. And we collect those up in our own database. And then when the time comes for the publishers to print a new edition, that's all transmitted to the publishers. And, they do their thing with it, and the printed and digital versions appear soon after.
Okay. So for the most part, you guys are hanging out, what, a couple weeks a year, something like that?
At least 1 week a year, and sometimes more.
Where do you get together? Is it somewhere fun? Like, do you at least go to like Hawaii or something?
Never been to Hawaii. In the 90s, it was actually cheaper for us to meet in Europe, and so we often did meet in pretty interesting places in the UK or in Europe.
Oh, cool.
Economy has changed, and so we generally meet at college campuses or hotels in various cities around the country. The committee is composed of scholars from many of the English-speaking countries. And so Australia or India, the UK. And so we want to try to make the meetings in a place that help everybody to get there most conveniently.
I don't know. I worry about the future of the committee because, like, if one of the perks is you're going to the UK and hanging out at Oxford with your smoking jackets and your pipes and stuff, like, I could see how that would get a lot of people to sign up. But if it's like a Motel 6 lobby in Cleveland, I don't know. It might attract a lesser crowd. I'm saying maybe some people need to kick in to make sure you guys are meeting in Oxford. It's more fun to imagine you there.
Well, I can't. We're well taken care of. I can't say that we've suffered too much in terms of the location and the travel.
Okay.
So
Well, and Cleveland is a lovely community, I'm sure. I'm sure. So you guys get along well. I mean, I assume you're corresponding throughout the year, working on this stuff. Do you consult with friends off the committee? I mean, you're talking with text critic, what do you call them?
Sure.
Text scholars who, like people like Daniel Wallace, who we've been talking about on my channel. I mean, do you just zip those guys an email and be like, what do I do with this?
Certainly consulting other colleagues or people who have expertise in relevant areas is something that the committee does.
You said that so much smarter sounding. Like I made it sound like you're you busting out 2 a.m. texts to each other. And yes, relevant scholarship. Okay, I hear what you're saying. But so people are eager to support you is the point?
Oh, I think so. Yeah. Yeah. Scholars, it's a community of scholarship, and particularly, I think, in Christian biblical studies, there's a lot of communication and collegiality. So,
does it ever get hot? Like, do you guys ever get legitimately frustrated with each other when you're stuck on a passage or disagreeing over a passage?
Oh, yes. I mean, certainly. I mean, when we're together, we work from like 8 in the morning till 6 at night, sitting around a conference table, and we're talking about things that, as I say, we feel passionate about the Word of God. And so, just the dynamics of human communication means that there are times when things get a little tense, or, we can't really come to an easy agreement. And so we either take a break or we table the question until we can get more research, more data, some new ideas or materials to bring back to the committee. But it's not it's an ironic process. We don't have a lot of fighting going on or arguing or loud voices, but once in a while, sure, it's natural that we would.
Yeah, that makes me. I'm grinning. You can see that makes me a little bit giddy. Part of what's been fun about about just talking to you through this process, and you're somebody whose work I've respected and appreciated forever. I've told you before how highly I think of your work on Esther. Like that affected the way I think about the character of God in the Bible and God as the main character of the Bible. So you know what I think about some of this stuff, but part of why I wanted to talk with you is just because I think it's important for people to understand that these are normal humans who are doing this work. It's not a magic document that descends from on high. And I like that you get after each other, and I like that you care enough to get after each other. It makes me feel good about the work that's being done.
Yeah, it's a very cerebral and intellectual kind of activity, even though it's spiritually meaningful to each of us, and everyone on the committee is a Christian. That we signed a statement of faith, and all within the Protestant theological position. But even in that, there's a lot of diversity. We have different Protestant denominations represented, but it's not a mystical process. We do pray, we do devotions. At the end of the session, we stand up together and sing the doxology. Cool. But it's biblical scholarship, and biblical scholarship stands at the intersection of many different academic disciplines. So, you have history, and you have linguistics, and you have theology and philosophy and archaeology and sociology, cultural studies. There's a lot that goes into understanding an ancient text and then accurately and clearly communicating that in the target language. So, we're not burning incense or doing mystical incantations over the text or anything. It's a very academic, intellectual process.
Okay. It's fun to imagine there being robes and candles and maybe some kind of blood or ritual or something, but you can't get away with wearing your deer skull helmets in the lobby at Motel 6 in Cleveland. But I know there are some people who look at what you do, and even though obviously I'm being sarcastic, there are some people who imagine that Bible translation is this insidious process where people with theological agendas and axes to grind try to co-opt the Bible and take it over. Do you get heat from people? Do people get grouchy with you at times?
Well, we do our best as Bible translators, given the information that we have and the scholarship and the state of the English language. So,
well, it's that state of the English language is a really interesting part of this that I just hadn't thought about until, well, frankly, I started preparing to talk with you. I naturally have thought a lot about the source material, and my Greek is hot garbage. I have to have 50 books out in front of me to accomplish anything. I would be a complete embarrassment at your meetings, where I imagine you guys just speak Greek to each other while you eat Greek food. But
no, our table's covered with reference and resource books, so we use a lot of materials too.
You make me feel a little better, but I know half of the job is becoming so conversant in the source language that the nuance, the idiomatic expressions, those more artful and difficult aspects of a language become something that the 15 of you can navigate. But English is such a moving target, and I just hadn't thought about that. The revision idea makes sense because 84 English is a lot different than 2011 or 2018 English. How do you keep up on what's happening in your own language to get to get it right on this end?
Yeah, and an English word can change its connotation just about overnight, with a TV commercial or a movie or the internet. And so we all have to keep our ears open for how different words are changing. One example of that is in the Revised NIV, there is no booty in the Old Testament. The 1984 version had booty and, spoil and plunder. But there's just certain words that cannot be used without causing some giggles, and we're very concerned. It's a Bible for the church, and we're concerned with how it sounds when it's read aloud in the church. Okay. And so if something's gonna cause either a reader to stumble over over it or the congregation to giggle. We want to change that.
Yeah, well, you're depriving middle school boys sitting in the back of
Right.
church everywhere of all of their fun. So now they can
Right.
put a face with that.
Yes.
It's your fault. One of the things that I most hear people gripe about with the NIV, which is the translation I use and appreciate,
Thank you.
is that the most recent revisions, they would complain, have, in their mind, an inappropriate shift toward gender-neutral pronouns.
Mm-hmm.
And you will see the comments on the internet where, again, conspiracy, deer helmets, blood, robes, and they wanted to take political correctness and ram it down our throats. And I don't know. I guess I'd like to talk to somebody who was a part of that team and just ask you what the rationale was in making that shift on how the pronouns work.
Yeah. But, the NIV is one of the last translations to make that shift.
Really?
Yeah, the NRSV, the NLT, all of them did it long before we did and didn't get half the heat for it. We consider that question to be a matter of gender accuracy, not gender neutrality. And it's driven by what the original source language says, not by any kind of political correctness or other agenda. If the original language includes both men and women, we want to clearly communicate that in modern English. If the original language is very specific to men or women, then we want to communicate that. Most of the debate comes in how do you communicate that in modern English, because for a long while, conventionally, the masculine generic was used to represent both men and women. Mm-hmm. That has fallen out of usage, and we know that because we had access to a database produced by the same folks who print the Collins Dictionary, and they put together a database of over 4 billion words from all kinds of literature and texts, Christian texts, non-Christian texts, sermons, books, magazines, and we could query that about how is language about gender currently being used. A couple of surprising things. One is that mankind, the word mankind is still very current, so you'll find that word in the Revised NIV. Okay. But almost no one, except for a small subculture of evangelical Christians, small subset of them, uses the generic masculine any longer. And it's not been taught in schools for decades. And so if you say man to young people, they think of a biological man. They don't consider man or men to be a generic reference. And what has happened is the third-person pronouns, they and their and them, have been adopted to replace the generic masculine. And so that's what we use in the NIV. Now, I have to say, when I was in elementary school grammar, that would have been marked with a red pencil that was not correct grammar. Yep. So it took me a little while for my ear to kind of get used to it. But it was being used in our society on news programs and in books, and it was widely used long before the NIV included it in our translation.
Okay, full disclosure, this is future me. I've wrapped up this interview, and I'm going to divide it into 2 parts. So I'm here to say, 1, thank you for watching the first half of this, but 2, you gotta watch the second half of this thing. The first half I thought was great for getting just the details and the outline and the specific stuff. How does the team work? All figured out. But part 2 is where we get into the deep water. We're going to talk about controversial stuff like what role does the publisher, the money people, play in their translation? Do they get any say? Do they affect things? We're going to talk about the controversial translation points in the Bible, those parts that people get really bent out of shape about and yell in all caps in internet comment sections. We're going to talk about the King James Version, how that works, what she makes of it, and then we're going to talk a little bit about how this whole thing has affected her and what she makes of Bible translation. So it's that and a bunch more. It is so good. You got to see it. I know how it works sometimes. You're like, I don't watch the first half. I think I get the gist. You don't get the gist. come back, watch the second half. If you like what's going on here, I'd welcome your subscription. If not, it's cool. The biggest thing is watch the second half of this video. All right, I'm Matt. This is the 10-Minute Bible Hour. You're awesome. Thanks for being a part. We'll see you in a minute.